Hi guys, in this video I cover the while loop. I start out with a flowchart to explain how the while loop works, and then I go over an example. Let's start out with the flowchart. In a basic program we have statements and we execute the statements sequentially from top to bottom. This is indicated by the two vertical lines here. So we execute them line by line. If at some point we encounter a while loop, the while loop has a condition that can be evaluated to true or to false, similar like an if condition. And similar like an if condition, if the condition here in the while loop is true, we execute a code block. Now, the difference to an if condition is that at the end of the code block, we go back and check the condition again. Now, if the condition of the while loop is still true, it executes the statement in the code block a second time. Then it goes back, checks the condition again. And if it's still true, it goes and executes the code block a third time. This continues as long as the condition is true. Now, there must be something in the code block that affects the condition. It could be an assignment to a variable, and the variable here is checked, for example. But eventually, this condition should be false. If their code block has nothing that affects the condition at all, it would be stuck in an infinite loop. It would be repeated over and over and over again, because the condition will never be false. So there must be something that affects the condition. Once the condition is false, it continues the program after the while loop. So it's very similar to an if condition. There is no else block. It's simply if it's false, it continues the program afterwards. So let's take a look at the syntax. We have the while keyword followed by a condition in parentheses and then a block of code. Now the block with the braces, this is optional. There can be a single statement without the braces, but it's always highly recommended that you explicitly define the code block to show your intention to the compiler. Now, you can see if we were to replace the while keyword with an if keyword, we simply have an if condition. So all we have to do is replace if with the while, and now we have a while loop. So at the end of the code block, it will go and check the condition again. Now let's take a look at an example. I create a variable of type scanner and I initialize it to a new scanner object that reads from system.in. I import this and then I output a prompt. Enter a positive number. I declare a variable of type number and I initialize it to the next integer that I read in using the scanner class. Now I want to be sure that the user will only enter a positive number. And if a negative number is entered, I want to make sure that I prompt again to remind the user to please enter a positive number. And I cannot really use that with an if condition because the if condition would only check it once. And then when I prompt for a second time and the user enters a negative number the second time, the if condition would simply continue the program. It would not check again. Now with the while loop, I can continuously check again. So here I check if the number is negative. And I want to be negative because that's when I want to reprompt. Right? If it's a positive number, there's no need for me to prompt. I can simply continue my program or start my program. Now here I output a prompt invalid input. Please enter a positive number. And I make this just a print, so the number can be entered at the end of the line. And then I read in a new integer. and I assign that to my number variable. Now you can see this statement affects the condition. So every time the condition checks a new value in that number variable. So eventually this will be false. So this is the important update operation. You always want to have an update operation that affects the condition. So the way this works, let's run this and see. I enter a negative number, so -2. -2 is less than 0. This condition is true. So it enters the code block and outputs invalid input. Please enter a positive number. Now let's enter -5. So entered -5. It goes now back to the condition and checks the condition again. Now -5 is still less than 0. So it enters the code block a second time. It outputs invalid input. Please enter a positive number. Now I enter -8. And it goes and checks the condition again. -8 is still less than 0. So it enters the block a third time. And it will continue to do so as long as the value here is negative. Because as long as it's negative, that's when the condition is true. Now when I enter something positive, let's say 4, it is 4, it stopped, it no longer outputted, basically ended the program. We cannot see it because I didn't put a statement here. But if I were to put a statement, we could start the calculation. It would output this message here. So we can see the program ended at that point. So this is very nice for user validation, for input validation, because it can continuously check a new value that has been entered. Now this was a very basic condition. So let's do another example. And here I output a prompt to enter a value between 20 to 30. I use this time a float variable, and I call this val, and I use the scanner to read the next float value. Now again, I want to prompt as long as something invalid has been entered, right? If something between 20 and 30 has been entered, I can just output a message, start program. So this starts calculating whatever I want to do. But when something invalid has been entered, I need to reprompt. So here I put the condition and I check if my value is less than 20 or if the value is larger than 30. Then I want to output a message. Invalid input. Please enter a value between 20 to 30. I make this also just a print statement without the line break, and then I read in the value again. Now let's run this. And for the first input, I just enter a positive value, so we can see it in this case. This condition is false, so just skip this, output it, start calculating, and now we went to the second example. Now here I have to enter something between 20 and 30. So I enter 15 to enter something invalid. Now 15 is less than 20, so this condition is automatically true. Since we have a logical OR, only one of the conditions needs to be true. And it will enter the block here, it will output the message, and then prompt for another value. Let's say I enter 32. 32. This condition is false, so it goes on to check the next condition. 32 is larger than 30. This is true. So the logical OR condition here becomes true. It enters the block again, outputs a new prompt, reads in another float. And this float, and this time I enter 27. Now it goes again. 27 is not less than 20. So it goes to check here. Is 27 larger than 30? This is false as well. So the overall condition is false. It doesn't enter the code block a third time, so it stops right there and continues the program flow. at the end of the program. Now, when you're new to programming with while loops, a lot of times it's kind of what I see what programmers do is they kind of intend to put an else block. Else blocks do not exist. There's no point in doing an else block, because the else block is simply whatever you write after. There's no point in doing else. It's only if this is true, this keeps continuing. If this is false, it simply continues after the program. So just remember, it's just like a basic if condition. The while loop is like a basic if condition. No else block. It just, the only difference is at the end of the code block, it checks the condition again. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.